Okay, now we're back again, and we're on paragraph 18, which covers a lot of things. There are a lot of subparagraphs here. So we covered A through F in a prior course, covered G separately because of force majeure, and now we're going to cover as many as we can here, starting with H, conveyance. Basically, these are definitions of terms here, by the way. So again, you need to make sure you're understanding what the contract says about this stuff. Basically, conveyance that the seller has to convey or give marketable title by either statutory warranty trustees, personal representatives, or guardian's deed. The only thing to be aware of here is normally we do a general warranty deed. That's typical here in the state of Florida. Where you might run into issues is when we have a bank-owned property, and bank-owned properties in particular like to do special warranty deeds, and that is why we have a separate addendum that we make the buyer sign, noting that hey, it's not a typical contract, you're not getting a typical deed, and you might want to consult a legal counsel on that, because special warranty deed kind of means that they're only going to warrant the title from the day that the bank owns the property forward, meaning there could be some issues lingering in the past. So you want to make sure you're aware of what a special warranty deed is, and notify your buyers that they may want to seek legal counsel on handling how that may occur. Closing location documents. People get caught up on this a little bit. The location, the closing will be conducted by the attorney or closing agent designated by the party who's paying for the owner's title policy. So that's where the closing is going to take place. Whoever's paying. Remember earlier in the contract we denoted who was paying for the title and who would then choose. There is a paragraph here that says it has to occur in the county in which the property is located. Basically, what they're saying there is that the deed has to be recorded in that county. So the title company that's doing it must be able to record the deed properly in the right county, because it is a county-specific item. Closing documents, they have to provide them with the deed, bill of sale certificates, other documents necessary to transfer the title. The seller has to be willing to work with, this paragraph says the seller will work with the title company to provide them what they need in order to transfer title cleanly. This is Fincen Gto. Fincen is basically for financial crimes network. They're trying to make sure there's no money laundering going on. Then if anybody's asked to do that, then the buyer would comply. A lot of times it's the new buyer getting it, would comply with any notices that were being delivered to the title company regarding that, and then the deed shall be reported upon the collection of all funds. So just because the seller signed the deed, until the funds are received, that's when the deed will be recorded, because the title company can't button this up and tie it all up until all the money has been received and then dispersed and all the monies have been accounted for. All right. J, escrow closing procedure. It says if the title commitment issued pursuant to paragraph 9C does not provide for insurance against adverse matters, this is kind of a big if. I've never seen this. So they should provide, the title policy needs to provide something that it insures against adverse matters. If it does not, then the mortgage company is going to kick it back. Or if it's a cash buyer, then the cash buyer's attorney, because you're going to recommend an attorney, let me say it again, and recommend attorney review the title commitment for a cash buyer, can make these elections to try and get this squared away. Prorations talks about when things are going to be prorated, and that's HOA assessments, bonds, any association fees, insurance, prepaid rents if it's a tenant occupied property. All that's going to go through. It does state that the taxes are going to be prorated upon current year's taxes, and if current year's taxes are not yet available, based upon a reasonable expectation of current year's taxes. At the closing, they always buyer and seller sign a tax reproration agreement, that if it's significantly different than what they prorated upon, then the buyer and seller agree to come back and reprorate if there are issues down the road. Let's see. Paragraph L, access to the property to conduct appraisals, inspections, and walkthroughs. Seller shall, upon reasonable notice, provide utility service and access to property for appraisals and inspections, including a walkthrough or a follow walkthrough if necessary prior to closing. I have a little note here that this is missed a lot. Seller must give access and provide utilities for all inspections, including the final walkthrough. So a lot of times sellers, they like to leave their houses empty and then turn off all the utilities, or after the first inspection is done, turn off all the utilities. Realize that we're not so much in that situation right now, but you may be listening where there is a short sale situation. Don't let a seller sign a contract that obligates them to have utilities on if they're not prepared to get utilities on. So many times people say, hey, look, the seller won't turn on utilities. Well, they won't turn it on is one thing, but their paragraph L says they are obligated to unless otherwise noted in the contract. So realize that the utilities for the inspections are the seller's responsibility all the way through the walkthrough. I've seen deals not close on time because the seller turned the utilities off 2 days earlier. I mean, just leave them on for Pete's sake until the property is officially closed. All right. You can even leave the main breaker off if you're that concerned about it. Turn the main breaker off, but just have the access to the stuff so that if they need to do a walkthrough and whatever. Risk of loss. Let's see if we can get through this one. Yeah. Risk of loss. If an effective date, if after the effective date, but before closing, property is damaged by fire or other casualty, it's going to go through some different things here. So here's what's going to happen. What happens after you go to contract and then a fire ravages the home and burns it all down, right? Well, the seller is responsible for that because it has not transferred title yet. So that still seller owns that. So either they kept it insured, or if they didn't have a loan on the thing and let the insurance lapse or decided not to insure it, if they owned it outright, they have to restore this thing up to its standards that it was at the time that the contract was in place. So and the cost of restoration does not exceed 1.5%. The cost of restoration shall be an obligation to the seller and proceed pursuant. So if, let's say it was a minor something, it was let's say $100,000 purchase price, and the repairs, if there was some type of risk of loss or some type of loss and it was less than $1,500, then the cost shall be an obligation to the seller. If the restoration is not completed, then they can escrow up to 125% of that. All right. If the actual cost exceeds the escrowed amount, seller shall pay such actual cost, but not excess of one purchase price. Any unused portion of escrow, if the cost of restoration exceeds 1.5%, buyer shall elect to either take the property as is together with the 1.5% or receive a refund of the deposit. Seller's sole obligation with respect to tree damage, it specifies tree damage by casualty or other natural occurrences, shall be the cost of pruning or removal if there is some tree damage. That's there. Let's see, 1031 exchange. If either the buyer or seller wish to enter into a like-kind exchange, which you guys can go to other courses on that, it just says that the other party shall cooperate, meaning that if the seller wants to do 1031 exchange and there's some type of document that needs to be signed by the buyer, as long as the buyer doesn't have to have some type of obligation or fear of obligating themselves further than what they're comfortable with, then they shall cooperate in all reasonable respects to effectuate the exchange. Likewise, if the buyer was seeking to purchase with that. All right, let's see if we can get through one more. Contract not recordable, persons bound, notice, delivery, copies, contract. Neither this contract or any art shall be recorded in public record. So what they're saying is that you can't take this contract and record it as a lien or anything like that. Or because there are some wholesale people that love to do this kind of stuff, but this is not something. The only thing that can be recorded is the actual warranty deed that's being transferred, and that's at the time of transfer. So the contract in and of itself shall not be recorded. Contract shall be binding and insured to the benefit of the parties and their respective heirs or successors. So what happens if the buyer dies in between the time they go to contract? Well, the heirs of the buyer, who's now passed away, have the rights to the contract still because it will pass along to them. Then it goes into some other definitions here, so you can read through these about singular. It's a lot of legal jargon and verbiage there. Okay. Integration, modification. Let's cover P. This contract contains the full and complete understanding and agreement of buyer and seller with respect to the transaction contemplated by this contract, and no prior agreements or representation shall be binding upon buyer or seller unless included in this contract. No modification or change to this contract shall be valid or binding upon buyer or seller unless in writing and executed by the parties intended to be bound upon it. So all this, oh, I got an email that said that they were willing to do a repair, or I can't emphasize enough, guys, that everything has to be in writing. This says it one more time, that this contract, because a judge is not going to care about what you thought or what your client thought the seller meant. They're going to care about what the contract says and what has been agreed to in writing by both parties. So if this contract is binding both parties, if you want to change any term in here, it has to be agreed upon by both parties and signed off on. So you can't say an email did it. If someone's it's an as-is contract and now all of a sudden the seller's going to do repairs, them saying, oh, the seller will take care of it from the listing agent is not sufficient. You need to have something in writing that obligates the actual parties that are party to the contract. Something from in writing signed by the listing agent doesn't do you any good. Has to be signed by the seller, the actual party to the contract. Okay, so that covers us through subparagraph P. So we'll wrap it up and then we'll catch Q through the end here in the next class.